ask me, maybe we can do that in a chat or right at the end of class. I can help you with your response a little bit more. Was there anybody else who had any questions, either in the room or online, about the story or the quiz? No? Okay, I'm going to read aloud the next chapter. So that's one of the reasons I want to record, so that if you are losing Wi-Fi and I'm coming in and out, you'll be able to listen to it separately. And then for people who are absent on our end, they can listen to it as well. So give me a moment. We are on chapter 6. We're on chapter 6. And at this point, people in the room don't need to have your computers on because there's nothing to look at there. Okay. Remember that you can start paying attention to words. So that you want to add to the vocabulary list. So we'll be adding to vocabulary 7 now. So those of you in Afghanistan can add to your list vocabulary 7, and those here can add to your list vocabulary 7. Okay, that'll be due on Thursday. And looks like Zora's not on today. Is that right? She's chatting me. Okay. Oh, this is Layla's 1,000 Splendid Suns. Oh, great. So Zora sent in Layla's. Okay, that was nice. Okay. Six. Six. Let's see. Oh, there's Fariba. Hello, Fariba. Okay, let me just check my attendance briefly here. See if they just... Okay, let's see. Okay. Looks like I don't need to respond. Good morning, Zora. Good morning, Nazanin. Okay, chapter 6. Just pause that. Thanks. All right, you guys have pencils in case you want to. So I'm recording class this morning in case that we go in and out of Wi-Fi for you, and you can always listen to it again later. Okay. All right, chapter 6. We know that Nana has died, right? So they have to figure out how to deal with Miriam. They buried Nana in a corner of the cemetery in Guldaman. Miriam stood beside Bibi Joe with the women as Mullah Faizullah recited prayers at the graveside, and the men lowered Nana's shrouded body into the ground. Afterward, Jalil walked Miriam to the kolba, where, in front of the villagers who accompanied them, he made a great show of tending to Miriam. He collected a few of her things, put them in a suitcase. He sat beside her cot, where she lay down, and fanned her face. He stroked her forehead and, with a woebegone expression on his face, asked if she needed anything, anything. He said it like that, twice. I want Mullah Faizullah, Miriam said. Of course, he's outside. I'll get him for you. It was when Mullah Faizullah's slight, stooping figure appeared in the kolba's doorway that Miriam cried for the first time that day. Oh, Miriam Joe. He sat next to her and cupped her face in his hands. You go on and cry, Miriam Jo. Go on. There is no shame in it. But remember, my girl, what the Quran says. Blessed is he in whose hand is the kingdom, and he who has power over all things, who created death and life, that he may try you. The Quran speaks the truth, my girl. Behind every trial and every sorrow that he makes us shoulder, God has a reason. But Miriam could not hear comfort in God's words, not that day, not then. All she could hear was Nana saying, I'll die if you go. I'll just die. All she could do was cry and let her fears fall on the spotted, paper-thin skin of Mullah Faizula's hands. On the ride to his house, Jalil sat in the back seat of his car with Miriam, his arm draped over her shoulder. You can stay with me, Miriam Jo, he said. I've asked them already to clean a room for you. It's upstairs. You'll like it, I think. You'll have a view of the garden. For the first time, Miriam could hear him with Nana's ears. She could hear so clearly how the insincerity that had always lurked beneath the hollow, false assurances. She could not bring herself to look at him. When the car stopped before Jalil's house, the driver opened the door for them and carried Miriam's suitcase. Jalil guided her, one palm cupped around each of her shoulders, through the same gates waiting for him. Same gates, outside of which, 2 days before, Miriam had slept on the sidewalk waiting for him. 2 days before, when Miriam could think of nothing in the world she wanted more than to walk in this garden with Jalil. Felt like another lifetime. How could her life have turned upside down so quickly? Miriam asked herself. She kept her gaze to the ground, on her feet, stepping on the gray stone path. She was aware of the presence of people in the garden, murmuring, stepping aside as she and Jalil walked past. She sensed the weight of eyes on her, looking down from the windows upstairs. Inside the house, too, Miriam kept her head down. She walked on a maroon carpet with a repeating blue and yellow octagonal pattern, saw out of the corner of her eye the marble bases of statues, the lower halves of vases, the frayed ends of richly colored tapestries hanging from walls. The stairs she and Jalil took were wide and covered with a similar carpet, nailed down at the base of each step. At the top of the stairs, Jalil led her to the left, down another long carpeted hallway. She stopped by one of the doors, opened it, and let her in. Your sisters, Nilofar and Atiya, play here sometimes, Jalil said, but mostly we use this as a guest room. You'll be comfortable here, I think. It's nice, isn't it? The room had a bed with a green flowered blanket knit in a tightly woven honeycomb design. The curtains, pulled back to reveal the garden below, matched the blanket. Beside the bed was a 3-drawer chest with a flower vase on it. There were shelves along the walls with framed pictures of people Miriam did not recognize. On one of the shelves, Miriam saw a collection of identical wooden dolls arranged in a line in order of decreasing size. Jalil saw her looking. Marioshka dolls. I got them in Moscow. You can play with them if you want. No one will mind. I had a set of those. They're very popular in Russia when I was there in college. Miriam sat down on the bed. Is there anything you want? Jalil said. Miriam lay down, closed her eyes. After a while, she heard him softly shut the door. Except for when she had to use the bathroom down the hall, Miriam stayed in the room. The girl with the tattoo, the one who had opened the gates to her, brought her meals on a tray, lamb kebab, sabzi, haush soup. Most of it went uneaten. Jalil came by several times a day, sat on bed beside her, asked if she was all right. You could eat downstairs with the rest of us, he said, but without much conviction. He understood a little too readily when Miriam said she preferred to eat alone. From the window, Miriam watched impassively what she had wondered about and longed to see for most of her life, the comings and goings of Jalil's daily life. Servants rushed in and out of the front gates. A gardener was always trimming bushes, watering plants in the greenhouse. Cars with long, sleek hoods pulled up on the street. From them emerged men in suits and chapins and caracol hats. Women in hijabs, Are those the ones, those are the hats from the sheep, right? In the presentation? Are those the hats from that are kind of tall? Guessing. Women in hijabs. Children had children with neatly combed hair. And as Miriam watched Jalil shake these strangers' hands, as she saw him cross his palms on his chest and nod to their wives, she knew that Nana had spoken the truth. She did not belong here. You need a book? Okay. I can show you where we are. You don't need your computer open. Let's just read. We started chapter 6. So, except for when. A little more. You'll have to read the first part yourself. Keep going. Probably. Yeah, we're in this area because this is here. But where do I belong? What am I going to do now? I'm all you have in this world, Miriam, and when I'm gone, you'll have nothing. You'll have nothing. You are nothing. Like the wind through the willows around the Kolba, gusts of an inexpressible blackness kept passing through Miriam. On Miriam's second full day in Jalil's house, a little girl came to the room. I have to get something, she said. Miriam sat up on the bed and crossed her legs, pulled the blanket on her lap. The girl hurried across the room and opened the closet door. She fetched a square-shaped gray box. You know what this is? She said. She opened the box. It's called a gramophone. Gramophone. It plays records. You know, music. A gramophone. You're Nilüfer. You're 8. The little girl smiled. She had Jalil's smile and his dimpled chin. How did you know? Miriam shrugged. She didn't say to this girl that she'd once named a pebble after her. Do you want to hear a song? Miriam shrugged again. Nilüfer plugged in the gramophone. She fished a small record from a pouch beneath the box's lid. She put it on, lowered the needle. Music began to play. I will use a flower petal for paper and write you the sweetest letter. You are the Sultan of my heart, the Sultan of my heart. Do you know it? No. It's from an Iranian film. I saw it at my father's cinema. Hey, do you want to see something? Before Miriam could answer, Nilüfer had put her palms and forehead to the ground. She pushed with her soles, and then she was standing upside down on her head in a 3-point stance. Can you do that? She said thickly. No. Nilüfer dropped her legs and pulled her blouse back down. I could teach you, she said, pushing hair from her flushed brow. So how long will you stay here? I don't know. My mother says you're not really my sister, like you say you are. I never said I was, Miriam lied. She says you did. I don't care. What I mean is, I don't mind if you did say it. If you are my sister, I don't mind. Miriam lay down. I'm tired now. My mother says a djinn made your mother hang herself. You can stop that now, Miriam said, turning to her side. The music, I mean. Bibi Jo came to see her that day, too. It was raining by the time she came. She lowered her large body onto the chair beside the bed, grimacing. This rain, Miriam Jo, it's murder on my hips. Just remember, I tell you, I hope, oh, now come here, child. Come here to Bibi Jo. Don't cry. There now, you poor thing. You poor, poor thing. That night, Miriam couldn't sleep for a long time. She lay in bed looking at the sky, listening to the footsteps below. The voices muffled by walls and the sheets of rain punishing the window. When she did doze off, she was startled awake by shouting, voices downstairs, sharp and angry. Miriam couldn't make out the words. Someone slammed a door. The next morning, Mullah Faizullah came to visit her. When she saw her friend at the door, his white beard and his amiable, toothless smile, Miriam felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She swung her feet over the side of the bed and hurried over. She kissed his hand as always, and he her brow. She pulled him up a chair. He showed her the Quran he had brought with him and opened it. I figured no sense in skipping our routine, eh? You know I don't need lessons anymore, Mullah Sahib. You taught me every surah and ayat in the Quran years ago. He smiled and raised his hand in a gesture of surrender. I confess then, I've been found out. But I can think of worse excuses to visit you. You don't need excuses, not you. You're kind to say that, Miriam Jo. He passed her his Quran. As he taught her, she kissed it 3 times, touching it to her brow between each kiss, and gave it back to him. How are you, my girl? I keep, Miriam began. She had to stop, feeling like a rock and it lodged itself in her throat. I keep thinking of what she said to me before I left. Nay, 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 Mullah Faizullah put his hand on her knee. Your mother, may Allah forgive her, was a troubled and unhappy woman, Miriam Joe. She did a terrible thing to herself, to you, and also to Allah. He will forgive her for he is all forgiving, but Allah is saddened by what she did. He does not approve of the taking of life, be it another's or one's own, for he says that life is sacred. You see, he pulled his chair closer, took Miriam's hand in both of his own. You see, I knew your mother before you were born, when she was a little girl, and I tell you that she was unhappy then. The seed for what she did was planted long ago, I'm afraid. What I mean to say is, this is not your fault. It wasn't your fault, my girl. I shouldn't have left her. You stop that. These thoughts are no good, Miriam Joe. You hear me, child? No good. They will destroy you. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault, no. Miriam nodded, but as desperately as she wanted to, she could not bring herself to believe him. One afternoon, a week later, there was a knock on the door, and a tall woman walked in. She was fair-skinned, had reddish hair, and long fingers. I'm off soon, she said, Niloufar's mother. Why don't you wash up, Miriam, and come downstairs? Miriam said she would rather stay in her room. No, Nafamidi, you don't understand. You need to come down. We have to talk to you. It's important. Chapter 7. Sorry, you missed a chapter. I'm recording though, so if you want to hear me again. Chapter 7. Anybody have any ideas what might happen? No? Okay, I won't give it away yet. They sat across from her, Jalil and his wives. How many wives does Jalil have? 3. 3 wives. 11 children, if you count Miriam. They sat across from her, Jalil and his wives, at a long, dark brown table. Between them, in the center of the table, was a crystal vase of fresh marigolds and a sweating pitcher of water. The red-haired woman who had introduced herself as Niloufar's mother, Afsun, was sitting on Jalil's right. The other two, Khadija and Nargis, were on his left. The wives each had a flimsy black scarf, which they wore not on their heads, but tied loosely around the neck, like an afterthought. Miriam, who could not imagine that they would wear black for Nana, pictured one of them suggesting it, or maybe Jalil, just before she'd been summoned. Afsun poured water from the pitcher and put the glass before Miriam on a checkerboard cloth coaster. Only spring, and it's warm already, she said. She made a fanning motion with her hand. Have you been comfortable? Nargis, who had a small chin and curly black hair, asked. We hope you've been comfortable. This ordeal must be very hard for you, so difficult. The other two nodded. Miriam took in their plucked eyebrows, the thin, tolerant smiles they were giving her. There was an unpleasant hum in Miriam's head. Her throat burned. She drank some of the water. Through the wide window behind Jalil, Miriam could see a row of flowering apple trees. On the wall beside the window stood a dark wooden cabinet. It was a clock. In it was a clock and a framed photograph of Jalil and 3 young boys holding a fish. The sun caught the sparkle in the fish's scales. Jalil and the boys were grinning. Well, Afsun began, we have brought you here because we have some very good news to give you. Miriam looked up. She caught a quick exchange of glances between the women over Jalil, who slouched in his chair looking unseeingly at the pitcher on the table. It was Khadija, the oldest looking of the 3, who turned her gaze to Miriam, and Miriam had the impression that this duty had been discussed, agreed upon, before they had called for her. You have a suitor, Khadija said. Miriam's stomach fell. A what? She said through suddenly numb lips. A Kastigar, a suitor. His name is Rashid. Khadija went on. He is a friend of a business acquaintance of your father's. He's a Pashtun from Kandahar originally, but he lives in Kabul, in the Demazang district, in a 2-story house that he owns. Afsun was nodding. And he does speak Farsi, like us, like you, so you won't have to learn Pashto. Miriam's chest was tightening. So remember, how old is Miriam? 15. It was her 15th birthday, remember? Okay. Afsun was nodding. I'm sorry. Miriam's chest was tightening. The room was reeling up and down, the ground shifting beneath her feet. He's a shoemaker, Khadijah was saying now, but not some kind of ordinary street-side moochie. No, no. He has his own shop, and he is one of the most sought-after shoemakers in Kabul. He makes them for diplomats, members of the presidential family, that class of people. So you see, he will have no trouble providing for you. Miriam fixed her eyes on Jalil, her heart somersaulting in her chest. Is this true? What she's saying, is it true? But Jalil wouldn't look at her. He went on chewing the corner of his lower lip and staring at the picture. Now, he is a little older than you, Afsun chimed in, but he can't be more than 40, 45 at the most. Wouldn't you say, Nargis? Yes. But I've seen 9-year-olds given to men 20 years older than your suitor, Miriam. We all have. What are you, 15? That's a good, solid marrying age for a girl. There was enthusiastic nodding at this. It did not escape Miriam that no mention was made of her half-sisters Seda or Nahid, both her own age, both students at the Mary School in Herat, both with plans to enroll in Kabul University. 15, evidently, was not a good, solid marrying age for them. What's more, Nargis went on, he too has had a great loss in his life. His wife, we hear, died during childbirth 10 years ago, and then 3 years ago, his son drowned in a lake. It's very sad, yes. He's been looking for a bride the last few years, but hasn't found anyone suitable. I don't want to, Miriam said. She looked at Jalil. I don't want this. Don't make me. She hated the sniffling, pleading tone of her voice, but could not stop it. Now be reasonable, Miriam, one of the wives said. Miriam was no longer keeping track of who was saying what. She went on staring at Jalil, waiting for him to speak up, to say that none of this was true. You can't spend the rest of your life here. Don't you want a family of your own? Yes, a home, children of your own. You have to move on. True that it would be preferable that you marry a local, a Tajik, but Rashid is healthy and interested in you. He has a home and a job. That's all that really matters, isn't it? And Kabul is a beautiful and exciting city. You may not get another opportunity this good. Miriam turned her attention to the wives. I'll live with Mullah Faizullah, she said. He'll take me in. I know he will. That's no good, Khadijah said. He's old, and so she searched for the right word. And Miriam knew that what she really wanted to say was, he's so close. She understood what they meant to do. You may not get another opportunity this good. And neither would they. They had been disgraced by her birth, and this was their chance to erase, once and for all, the last trace of her husband's scandalous mistake. She was being sent away because she was the walking, breathing embodiment of their shame. He's so old and weak, Khadijah eventually said, and what will you do when he's gone? You'd be a burden to his family. As you are now to us, Miriam almost saw the unspoken words exist in Khadijah's mouth, like foggy breath on a cold day. Miriam pictured herself in Kabul, a big, strange, crowded city that, Jalil had once told her, was some 650 kilometers to the east of Herat. 650 kilometers. The farthest she'd ever been from the Kolba was the 2-kilometer walk she'd made to Jalil's house. She pictured herself living there in Kabul, at the other end of that unimaginable distance, living in a stranger's house where she would have to concede to his moods and his issued demands. She would have to clean after this man, Rashid, and cook for him, wash his clothes. And there would be other chores as well. Nana had told her what husbands did to their wives. It was the thought of these intimacies in particular, which she imagined as painful acts of perversity, that filled her with dread and made her break out in a sweat. She turned to Jalil again. Tell them you won't let them do this. Actually, your father has already given Rashid his answer. Afsun said, Rashid is here in Herat. He has come all the way from Kabul. The nikah will be tomorrow morning. And then there is a bus leaving for Kabul at noon. Tell them, Miriam cried. The women grew quiet now. Miriam sensed that they were watching him too, waiting. A silence fell over the room. Jalil kept twirling his wedding band with a bruised, helpless look on his face. From inside the cabinet, the clock ticked on and on. Jalil Joe, one of the women said at last. Jaleel's eyes lifted slowly, met Miriam's, lingered for a moment, then dropped. He opened his mouth, but all that came forth was a single pained groan. Oh. Say something, Miriam said. When Jaleel did, in a thin, threadbare voice, God damn it, Miriam, don't do this to me, he said, as though he was the one to whom something was being done. And with that, Miriam felt the tension vanish from the room. As Jaleel's wives began a new and more sprightly round of reassuring, Miriam looked down at the table. Her eyes traced the sleek shape of the table's legs, sinuous curves of its corners, the gleam of its reflective dark brown surface. She noticed that every time she breathed out, the surface fogged, and she disappeared from her father's table. Afsun escorted her back to the room upstairs. When Afsun closed the door, Miriam heard the rattling of a key as it turned in the lock. Man, locking her in now. Chapter 8. I'll drink water first. Good morning, Fariba Mahibi. Didn't see you earlier.
Hello, teacher. You mentioned I read it?
Yep, good morning. All right, chapter 8.
Mm-hmm.
In the morning, Miriam was given a long-sleeved dark green dress to wear over white cotton trousers. Afsun gave her the green hijab and a pair of matching sandals. She was taken to the room with the long brown table, except now there was a bowl of sugar-coated almond candy in the middle of the table, a Quran, a green veil, and a mirror. Two men Miriam had never seen before, witnesses, she presumed, and a mullah she did not recognize, were already seated at the table. Jaleel showed her a chair. He was wearing a light brown suit and a red tie. His hair was washed. When he pulled out the chair for her, he tried to smile encouragingly. Khadija and Afsun sat on Miriam's side of the table this time. The mullah motioned toward the veil, and Nargis arranged it on Miriam's head before taking a seat. Miriam looked down at her hands. You can call him in now, Jaleel said to someone. I love these descriptions of Rashid here, by the way. Miriam smelled him before she saw him. Cigarette smoke and thick, sweet cologne, not faint like Jaleel's. The scent of it flooded Miriam's nostrils. Through the veil, from the corner of her eye, Miriam saw a tall man, thick-bellied and broad-shouldered, stooping in the doorway. The size of him almost made her gasp, and she had to drop her gaze, her heart hammering away. She sensed him lingering in the doorway. Then his slow, heavy-footed movement across the room. The candy bowl on the table clinked in tune with his step. With a thick grunt, he dropped onto the chair beside her. He breathed noisily. The mullah welcomed them. He said this would not be a traditional nikah. I understand that Rashid Aga has tickets for the bus to Kabul that leaves shortly. So in the interest of time, we will bypass some of the traditional steps to speed up the proceedings. The mullah gave a few blessings, said a few words about the importance of marriage. He asked Jaleel if he had any objections to this union, and Jaleel shook his head. Then the mullah asked Rashid if he indeed wished to enter a marriage contract with Miriam. Rashid said yes. His harsh, raspy voice reminded Miriam of the sound of dry autumn leaves crushed underfoot. And do you, Miriam Yan, accept this man as your husband? Miriam stayed quiet. Throats were cleared. She does, a female voice said from down the table. Actually, the mullah said, she herself has to answer, and she should wait until I ask 3 times. The point is, he's seeking her, not the other way around. He asked the question 2 more times. When Miriam didn't answer, he asked it once more, this time more forcefully. Miriam could feel Jaleel beside her shifting in his seat, could sense feet crossing and uncrossing beneath the table. There was more throat clearing. A small white hand reached out and flicked a bit of dust off the table. Miriam, Jaleel whispered. Yes, she said shakily. A mirror was passed beneath the veil. In it, Miriam saw her own face first, the archless, unshapely eyebrow, the flat hair, the eyes mirthless green and set so closely together that one might mistake her for being cross-eyed. Her skin was coarse and had a dull, spotty appearance. She thought her brow too wide, the chin too narrow, the lips too thin. The overall impression was of a long face, a triangular face, a bit hound-like. And yet Miriam saw that, oddly enough, the whole of these unmemorable parts made for a face that was not pretty, but somehow not unpleasant to look at either. In the mirror, Miriam had her first glimpse of Rashid, the big, square, ruddy face, the hooked nose, the flushed cheeks that gave the impression of sly cheerfulness, the watery, bloodshot eyes, the crowded teeth, the front two pushed together like a gabled roof, the impossibly low hairline, barely 2 fingers' widths above the bushy eyebrows, the wall of thick, coarse salt and pepper hair. Their gazes met briefly in the glass and slid away. This is the face of my husband, Miriam thought. They exchanged the thin gold bands that Rashid fished from his coat pocket. His nails were yellow-brown, like the inside of a rotting apple, and some of the tips were curling, lifting. Miriam's hands shook when she tried to slip the band onto his finger, and Rashid had to help her. Her own band was a little tight, but Rashid had no trouble forcing it over her knuckles. There, he said. It's a pretty ring, one of the wives said. It's lovely, Miriam. All that remains now is the signing of the contract, the mullah said. Miriam signed her name, the mim, the re, the ya, and the mim again, conscious of all the eyes on her hand. The next time Miriam signed her name to a document 27 years later, a mullah would again be present. You are now husband and wife, the mullah said. Tabrik, congratulations. So that little paragraph, Miriam signed her name, and the next time would be 27 years later. All right, what would we call that in literature when we're given a hint about the future? Do you know the term for that? The hints about the future that the author gives. Anybody remember?
Isn't it's like foreshadowing, maybe?
Absolutely, Cassie. It's called foreshadowing, right? He's giving us a little hint of what is to come. Yep. Good job. Rashid waited in the multicolored bus. Miriam could not see him from where she stood with Jalil by the rear bumper. Only the smoke of a cigarette curling up from the open window. Around them, hands shook and farewells were said. Qurans were kissed, passed under. Barefoot boys bounced between travelers, their faces invisible behind their trays of chewing gum and cigarettes. Jalil was busy telling her that Kabul was so beautiful, the Mughal Emperor Babur had asked that he be buried there. Next, Miriam knew he'd go on about Kabul's gardens and its shops, its trees and its air, and before long, she would be on the bus and he would walk alongside it waving cheerfully, unscathed, spared. Miriam could not bring herself to allow it. I used to worship you, she said. Jalil stopped in mid-sentence. He crossed and uncrossed his arms. A young Hindi couple, the wife cradling a boy, the husband dragging a suitcase, passed between them. Jalil seemed grateful for the interruption. They excused themselves and he smiled back politely. On Thursdays, I sat for hours waiting for you. I worried myself sick that you wouldn't show up. It's a long trip. You should eat something. He said he could buy her some bread and goat cheese. I thought about you all the time. I used to pray that you'd live to be 100 years old. I didn't know. I didn't know that you were ashamed of me. Jalil looked down and, like an overgrown child, dug at something with the toe of his shoe. You were ashamed of me. I'll visit you, he muttered. I'll come to Kabul and see you. No, she said. Don't come. I won't see you. Don't you come. I don't want to hear from you ever, ever. He gave her a wounded look. It ends here for you and me. Say your goodbyes. Don't leave like this, he said in a thin voice. You didn't even have the decency to give me the time to say goodbye to Mullah Faizullah. She turned and walked around the side of the bus. She could hear him following her. When she reached the hydraulic drawers, she heard him behind her. Miriam Joe. She climbed the stairs, and though she could spot Jalil out of the corner of her eye walking parallel to her, she did not look out the window. She made her way down the aisle to the back, where Rashid sat with her suitcase between his feet. She did not turn to look when Jalil's palms pressed on the glass, when his knuckles rapped and rapped on it. When the bus jerked forward, she did not turn to see him trotting alongside, and when the bus pulled away, she did not look back to see him receding, to see him disappear in the cloud of exhaust and dust. Rashid, who took up the window in the middle seat, put his thick hand on hers. "There now, girl, there," he said. He was squinting out the window as he said this, as though something more interesting had caught his eye. Ah. Anybody feeling sorry for Miriam at the moment? No, Ben's not feeling sorry for her.
Everyone feels sorry for her.
She's got a nice husband now. Let's wait and see how that relationship goes. Zora's quite convinced that that will not be the case. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, there are two protagonists in this story, right? Two main characters, and Miriam is obviously one of them. And then we will have another, Layla, down the line. And as we get introduced to Layla, we'll start to look at this story too as a hero's quest, just like The Alchemist. Hero's quests don't always have to be positive experiences throughout. And this book combines the romantic hero and the tragic hero together, which is something that I like very much about this story. So we'll talk about that from a literature standpoint as we continue. I just have to see if I can't remember how many different sections I break this down into. So give me a minute here. How are you feeling about the story? Okay, next one. Good, not good? Good, yeah. Yeah, it's beautifully written. I like the way he uses metaphor for a lot and simile. And I don't know, is there anybody here? This is one of my personal issues. I can't stand really strong perfume. It's like it's horrible to me. Cigarette smoke, I don't care for either. But like the idea that she could smell Rashid before she could see him just makes me go gag, basically. So, that, and then the first time she sees him, is in a mirror. It's such a different experience than what we have here in the United States. But that the way he makes me really visualize Rashid, I think he writes beautifully. And even the way he describes Miriam's face, right? Because that's really the first time he gives any detailed description is when she sees herself in that mirror on the table. But yeah, I can smell Jalil coming and it's not pretty. Okay, that clock is really off. All right, I'm going to read chapter 9. It's very short. And then that will be it for today. And then I will be sending out, and we can do it in class tomorrow. That might be better. I have, again, just like you wrote paragraphs for chapters 1 through 3, I have for chapters 6 through 9. Okay. So let's read chapter 9, and then that should pretty well cover it. And I'll put the questions in for you. It was early evening the following day by the time they arrived at Rashid's house. "We're in Demazang," he said. They were outside on the sidewalk. He held her suitcase in one hand and was unlocking the wooden front gate with the other. "In the south and west part of the city. The zoo is nearby and the university too." Miriam nodded. Already she had learned that, though she could understand him, she had to pay close attention when he spoke. She was unaccustomed to the Kabuli dialect of his Farsi and to the underlying layer of Pashto accent, the language of his native Kandahar. He, on the other hand, seemed to have no trouble understanding her Harati Farsi. Miriam quickly surveyed the narrow, unpaved road along which Rashid's house was situated. The houses on this road were crowded together and shared common walls, with small walled yards in front, buffering them from the street. Most of the homes had flat roofs and were made of burned brick, some of them mud and some dusty color as the mountains that some of the mud and same dusty colors as the mountains that ringed the city. Gutters separated the sidewalk from the road on both sides and flowed with muddy water. Miriam saw small mounds of fly-blown garbage littering the street here and there. Rashid's house had 2 stories. Miriam could see that it had once been blue. When Rashid opened the front gate, Miriam found herself in a small, unkept yard where yellow grass struggled up in thin patches. Miriam saw an outhouse on the right in a side yard and, on the left, a well with a hand pump, a row of dying saplings. Near the well was a tool shed and a bicycle leaning against the wall. "Your father told me you like fish," Rashid said as they were crossing the yard to the house. There was no backyard, Miriam saw. "There are valleys north of here, rivers with lots of fish. Maybe I'll take you someday." He unlocked the front door and let her into the house. Rashid's house was much smaller than Jalil's, but compared to Miriam and Nana's kolba, it was a mansion. There was a sideways living room downstairs. There was a hallway, a living room downstairs, and a kitchen in which he showed her pots and pans and a pressure cooker and a kerosene ishtop. The living room had a pistachio green leather couch. It had a rip down its side that had been clumsily sewn together. The walls were bare. There was a table, 2 cane seat chairs, 2 folding chairs, and in the corner, a black cast iron stove. Miriam stood in the middle of the living room looking around. At the kolba, she could touch the ceiling with her fingertips. She could lie on her cot and tell the time of day by the angle of sunlight pouring through the windows. She knew how far her door would open before its hinges creaked. She knew every splinter and crack in each of the 30 wooden floorboards. Now all those familiar things were gone. Nana was dead, and she was here in a strange city, separated from the life she'd known by valleys and chains of snow-capped mountains and entire deserts. She was in a stranger's house, with all the different rooms and its smell of cigarette smoke, with its unfamiliar cupboards full of unfamiliar utensils, its heavy, dark green curtains, and a ceiling she knew she could not reach. The space of it suffocated Miriam. Pangs of longing bore into her for Nana, for Mula Faizullah, for her old life. Then she was crying. "What's this crying about?" Rashid said crossly. He reached into the pocket of his pants, uncurled Miriam's fingers, and pushed a handkerchief into her palm. He lit himself a cigarette and leaned against the wall. He watched as Miriam pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. "Done?" Miriam nodded. "Sure?" "Yes." He took her by the elbow then and led her to the living room window. "This window looks north," he said, tapping the glass with a crooked nail of his index finger. "That's the Asmai mountain directly in front of us. See? And to the left is the Allahabad mountain. The university is at the foot of it. Behind us, east, you can't see from here, is the Shir Darwaza mountain. Every day at noon, they shoot a cannon from it. Stop your crying now, I mean it." Miriam dabbed at her eyes. "That's one thing I can't stand," he said, scowling. "The sound of a woman crying. I'm sorry, I have no patience for it." "I want to go home," Miriam said. Rashid sighed irritably. A puff of his smoky breath hit Miriam's face. "I won't take that personally, this time." Again, he took her by the elbow and led her upstairs. There was a narrow, dimly lit hallway there and 2 bedrooms. The door to the bigger one was ajar. Through it, Miriam could see that, like the rest of the house, was sparsely furnished. Bed in the corner with a brown blanket and a pillow, a closet, a dresser. The walls were bare except for a small mirror. Rashid closed the door. "This is my room." He said she could take the guest room. "I hope you don't mind. I'm accustomed to sleeping alone." Miriam didn't tell him how relieved she was, at least about this. The room that was to be Miriam's was much smaller than the room she'd stayed in at Jalil's house. It had a bed, an old gray-brown dresser, a small closet. The window looked into the yard, and beyond that, the street below. Rashid put her suitcase in a corner. Miriam sat on the bed. "You didn't notice," he said. He was standing in the doorway, stooping a little to fit. "Look on the windowsill. You know what kind they are? I put them there before leaving for Herat." Only now Miriam saw a basket on the sill, white tuberoses spilled from its sides. You like them? They please you? Yes. You can thank me then. Thank you. I'm sorry, Tashakor. You're shaking. Maybe I scare you. Do I scare you? Are you frightened of me? Miriam was not looking at him, but she could hear something slyly playful in these questions, like a needling. She quickly shook her head in what she recognized as her first lie in her marriage. No, that's good then. Good for you. Well, this is your home now. You're going to like it here. You'll see. Did I tell you we have electricity? Most days. And every night? He made as if to leave. At the door, he paused, took a long drag, crinkled his eyes against the smoke. Miriam thought he was going to say something, but he didn't. He closed the door, left her alone with her suitcase and her flowers. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Any comments in the room or in Kabul? Does he accurately describe the mountains around Kabul? Can you picture where they are?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we know about Demazang,
Mm-hmm.
and when we go there, we can have a good vision of the mountain.
Mm. Good vision of the mountains. I've seen beautiful pictures.
They are.
Very pretty. You get a lot of snow on the mountains because they're tall, right? Very
Yeah,
high mountains. Yeah. So around us, we have mountains, but you have to go considerably farther east and north to get the ones with snow. Sometimes we see snow on the mountains here, but not very often.
but
It's
here in
far in the
Kabul,
distance.
it's like Kabul are in the mountain. Means everywhere we go, we can have the vision of mountains.
Yeah, it's kind of surrounding it, right? It surrounds
Yes.
Kabul.
Yes, it is surrounded by different mountains. We have Shahrak. Different people go there for fun. For yeah.
Well, maybe someday I'll see it. Okay. Anybody else have questions? Comments? Everybody understanding the story fine? Yes? Okay.
Yes, teacher.
Good. Yes, Paula.
Okay, teacher. So we know in here that Jalil was very good with Mariam before Nana's died. And after Nana's died, when the Mariam went to Jalil's house, he completely changed. And what do you think? Jalil decided before the Nana's died, decided to give Mariam or first Mariam to marry with an old man like Rashid, or no? After Nana's died, he decided this.
I think he decided after Nana died. You agree, Paula? Yeah. After Nana died, he decided it. I think as long as Miriam would have stayed at the Kolba, he would have continued to go visit her. I think Jalil does care about her, but I think she's right. I think he was ashamed of her as the evidence of his infidelity, and his wives clearly have made the decision to marry her and send her to Kabul. And she, of course, realizes that she's got to go far away. They just need to get rid of her, right? So that they can go back to their lives as Jalil's family without the evidence of her existence. So I don't think he would have married her off young to an older man if Nana had stayed alive. Now, she might not have gotten educated either, because Nana didn't want her educated, but I'm sure that she would have married later than she did.
Thank you, teacher. But what do you think? Why Nana did suicide? So when she was she paid attention about this future of Mariam, and she was worried about Mariam. Why she suicide?
Well, do you remember when Mullah Faizullah came to see Miriam at Jalil's house? and he said that she had always been unhappy, right? So I think that my personal perspective is, you know, there are people who commit suicide in this country often, unfortunately. And it generally is something that is, I think, starts from when they're young, you know, and it could just be the chemical makeup of a brain. I think there's scientific reasons that people feel eventually that living is too painful. And then, you know, so it's not something that happens just because of one incident. And that's why Mullah Faizullah is telling Miriam it's not her fault, right? All she did was go to see her father because that's what she really wished to have happen, is to see her father in town with his family. But it couldn't only be one incident that makes somebody commit suicide, whether it's Nana or anyone else. It's never only one thing. And that's what Mullah Faizullah was saying. Yeah. Paula, did you want to say something? Paula's speaking.
And the Muslims. Okay.
So Paula wants to know about the relationship between Miriam and Bibi Joe. So Bibi Joe was friends with Nana, right? She was kind of her one friend. And Bibi Joe would come out to the kolba, right? And they'd have tea. And so after Nana died, Bibi Joe visited her at Jalil's, but she was essentially the only friend that Nana had. Yeah, that's who she is. Anybody else? No. Okay. If you have found words that you want to add to the vocabulary list, now would be a very good time to do that. You have a few minutes. It's Tuesday. They're due on Thursday. Remember that when you do add words to the vocabulary lists, plugged in. When you do add words to the vocabulary list, that you look to make sure that somebody else hasn't already included your word. Okay. So please remember to do that both here in California and in Kabul.
Yes, sure.
If anybody needs me in Kabul to send you the link to the next vocabulary to make it simpler for you to access, I'm happy to do that. You can let me know. I can put the link in the HBA Kabul English chat.
Teacher, just we should complete the vocabulary 7 or 8.
7 is the next one. If you've already put words into 7, you're welcome to put them into 8 if you would like. But 7 is the one that's due on Thursday. Yeah. Kids in Kabul, have you gotten in when you signed into your email for High Bluff Academy? Did you get any sort of instructions about being able to access the grade book so that you can see grades for your classes, for your history and your English classes? Does that sound familiar? It's called Grade Link.
No.
Okay.
Doesn't.
Okay.
No, teacher.
Okay. So I will talk to Kristen because we should be able to give you access like the students here have. And they also have, a lot of them have it on their phones, right? You guys put GradeLink on your phones. Is that right? So that you can be sure to keep up with your assignments. No, Ben doesn't keep up with his assignments. So because one of the things I do is I put the assignments right in GradeLink so you can see when they're due. And then you can also see the grades for work that has been finished. So I will talk to Kristen about that. I'm going to go do that now while I have 5 minutes before class ends, and ask that she please send you your personal access to GradeLink. I don't know how that's going to work on your end, but there is an app for it that you could put on your phone, or you can do it online like I do on your computers, just on the internet. Okay. So I will see if we can get you access to that. Okay. All right. I will send you a message about that. once I get it, the information. So I'll put information about that in the HBA Kabul English chat in Teams. Okay. Okay. All right. I think that's it for today. Tomorrow I will give you guys the questions that go with chapters 6 through 9, and we can work on them during class tomorrow so that I can kind of give you any sort of feedback and help as we do it. Okay? Okay. I will see you tomorrow.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
teacher.
you.
Bye.
Bye, teacher. Have a nice time.
Bye.
Bye.
چطور است قد برف باران فرقا
دکترا میتونین بگین حالا امیجی هستن دیگه قرآن هم میزنم.
کجا ششتی شهر است باران میآید وقتی که
دکترا میتونین بگین استاد چی گفت؟ میتونین بگین استاد چی گفت؟ چون از ما آخری کی بود بیرون شدم نیت ضعیفی میکنه خیلی.
خب گفت که یک دانه بوک است بیگ بوگ است مثل چه قسمی است گفت ما معلومات چه میمونم باز گفت یکی دیگر را میگویم که قدر شما او را جور بکنه بگویم که شما را بتانه ما از او استفاده کرده بتانیم بس گفت معلومات چه میمونم دیگهش میمونم باز دیگر را میگم که بر شما راهنمایی بکنه خلاص دیگه.
خب سعی تشکر. راستی میشه تاریخ درس داریم؟
تاریخ نه خود درس داشته باشم ارزیابی باز است به نظرم.
باز از جا بیستم؟ چی گفت استاد؟ من از تاریخ برآمدم از تاریخ یکان چیزیش پیشم.
نه دخترا استاد گفته که ریت ما براتون میمونم یعنی که شما با امو نمره که میگیرین از اسایمنت های خود با خبر باشین. یقمی گفت
ماچم گفت که مقصد میمانم دیگه نفر دیگرم میگم که شیر کنن
گفته که کریستین میگم که براتون شیر کنه که شما مثلا کارخانگی که انجام میدین بفهمین که چند نمره میگیرین و نمیگیره.
خب ما که چی نفهمیدم همونطور میگم. سعیسته دختر. باز تشکر دیگه. فعلا بای.
بای بای.